My husband and I were married for 11 years before I found out he owned a building I had never been allowed to see. His name was Colin Hargrove. He was a structural engineer who drove a 10-year-old truck, packed his own lunch every day, and always joked that he was the least interesting person in any room. Maybe that was why it took me so long to question things. You don't look too hard at someone who seems like an open book. He died on a Tuesday in March. A blood clot nobody knew was there. He was 41 years old and had been to the doctor 3 weeks before for a routine checkup. They said he was fine. Then he wasn't. The grief came in waves I didn't expect. Not the big dramatic kind you see in movies. The quiet kind. The kind where you reach for your phone to text him something stupid and then remember. The kind where you hear a sound in another room and think, just for half a second, that it might be him. Our daughter was 22, just finishing her last semester at Ohio State. Her name is Nora. She drove home the night I called her and didn't go back for a week. She sat in his recliner in the living room and watched old videos on her phone with the sound low, and I didn't tell her to stop. 2 weeks after the funeral, we were at the office of his attorney, a man named Mr. Patterson, who I'd met exactly once at a holiday party years ago. He had the kind of office that smelled like old coffee and old carpet and old decisions. Nora sat beside me with her arms crossed, looking at the floor. She hadn't been sleeping. I could tell by the dark underneath her eyes and the way she kept pressing her lips together. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and slid an envelope across the desk toward me. Your husband left very specific instructions, he said. This was to be given to you only after his passing. Inside the envelope was a key, a regular house key, the kind you'd get copied at the hardware store, with a piece of blue painter's tape on it. In Colin's handwriting on the tape it said, Caldwell Street. I looked up. What is this, Mr. Patterson folded his hands. Your husband owned a property on Caldwell Street in Dayton. He purchased it 7 years ago. The property taxes are paid ahead through next year. The deed has been transferred to you. Nora's head came up. Dad owned a building, a warehouse, Mr. Patterson said, converted partially into a workshop space. He also left a letter and a USB drive with a recorded message. I opened the letter. Colin's handwriting, careful and neat the way it always was. He used to leave me notes on the kitchen counter when he left early for a job site. I'd kept every one of them in a shoebox in the closet. Lynn, it said. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry for keeping this from you. It wasn't about trust. It was about timing, and I ran out of it. Please go to the building before you make any decisions. There's a storage room on the 2nd floor. The combination is Nora's birthday. Everything you need is there. Don't let my brother pressure you into anything before you see it. Trust Vic Adler. He manages the property and he knows what's there. He'll help you. I read it twice. Then a 3rd time. Nora leaned over and read it without asking. When she finished, she sat back and looked at me. Uncle Raymond, she said quietly. That's what it says. Mr. Patterson was watching us both carefully. Your brother-in-law contacted this office 3 days ago, he said. He mentioned wanting to discuss the estate. Has he filed anything? Not yet. I plugged the USB drive into Mr. Patterson's computer. Colin's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting at a workbench I didn't recognize, in a space I had never seen. He looked tired but steady, the way he always looked when he had something serious to say. Lynn, he said, I bought that building because I found something. I've been sitting on it for 7 years trying to figure out the right way to handle it. The short version is this. Raymond has been running a rental scam through a shell company. He's been collecting rent from tenants in 3 low-income buildings on the south side, pocketing the money, and letting the properties fall apart. The city has been trying to trace the ownership for years. I have the paperwork, all of it. It's in the storage room. He knows I have it. That's why I never told you about the building. I didn't want him coming at you or Nora before I figured out what to do. Now that I'm gone, he's going to try. Don't let him. The video ended. Nora stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she said, he knew Uncle Raymond was scamming people and he just sat on it? He was trying to protect us, I said. For 7 years? I didn't have an answer for that. I'm not sure there was a good one. Outside it was cold and gray, the kind of Ohio March that makes you forget spring exists. Nora walked to the car ahead of me with her shoulders up around her ears. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute and looked at the sky. My husband had left me a key, a warning, and a building full of evidence against his own brother. And his brother was already circling. I called Nora's phone before she even got the car door open. "What?" she said, turning around. "We're going to the building first," I said, "before we do anything else." She looked at me for a second, then nodded once and got in the passenger seat instead. Caldwell Street was a mixed-use block in a part of Dayton that was somewhere between forgotten and almost revived. Old warehouses next to a coffee shop that had been there for 3 years, a vacant lot, a mural on a brick wall that somebody had painted carefully and well. Colin's building was at the far end, a 2-story structure with metal window frames and a loading dock that hadn't been used in years. A man was waiting on the front steps. He was in his early 60s, stocky, wearing a canvas work jacket and holding a paper coffee cup. He stood when we pulled up. "You must be Lynn," he said. "I'm Vic. Vic Adler. Colin talked about you? He told me you'd be coming eventually." He shook my hand, then Nora's. "I'm sorry about Colin, he was a good man." "How long did you know him?" Nora asked. 7 years. He hired me to manage the property the month he bought it. He paused. He said if anything ever happened to him, I was to give you full access and not let anyone else in until you got here. I looked at the building. From the outside, it was nothing. A plain front door with a deadbolt. Ground floor windows that had been painted over from the inside. "Has anyone tried to get in?" I asked. Vic's expression shifted slightly. "Your brother-in-law called me 2 days ago, said he was handling the estate and needed to do an inventory." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd need written authorization from the legal owner." He glanced at me. He didn't like that. Inside, the building smelled like sawdust and machine oil. The ground floor was a workshop. Colin's tools organized on pegboards, a workbench he must have built himself, labeled bins of hardware. A space heater in the corner. A mini fridge. A folded army blanket on a cot against the wall. Nora picked up a wrench from the workbench and turned it over in her hands. "He came here a lot," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Every other weekend," Vic said, "sometimes more." I hadn't known that. I thought those weekends were fishing trips with his old college friends. He'd come home smelling like cold air and told me the fish weren't biting. I'd laughed and made him a sandwich. I put that thought somewhere I could look at later and climbed the stairs to the second floor. The storage room was at the back. A solid door with a combination padlock, the kind with 4 digits. Nora's birthday. I dialed it in and the lock opened. Inside was a metal shelving unit running the full length of one wall. On it, organized in labeled binders and manila envelopes and 2 fireproof document boxes, was 7 years of work. Nora stood in the doorway. "What is all this?" I opened the first binder. "Bank statements. Rental agreements. LLC registration documents for a company called Crestwood Holdings." A separate folder with photographs of the properties, peeling ceilings, broken stairs, flooded basements, mold. Another folder with letters from tenants to the city, complaints that had gone unanswered for years. Another with city records tracing back toward Crestwood and stopping at a wall of layered ownership. Colin's handwriting was everywhere. Sticky notes on documents, arrows connecting names, a timeline drawn on graph paper taped to the inside of the back cover. He had been methodical, careful, the way he always was. At the bottom of the shelf was a small recorder. I pressed play. "Lynn," his voice. "If you're in this room, you already know most of it. What you don't know yet is that Raymond borrowed $60,000 from me 8 years ago. He said it was for a real estate investment. He never paid it back and I never pressed it because he was family. A year later, I found out the investment was Crestwood. He used my money to start the whole thing. That's in the blue binder, the loan documents and the wire transfer receipts. He knows I kept them. I think that's why he's been friendly. Kept me close. I don't know what he'll do now that I'm not there. But you need to know that before you talk to him." The recorder clicked off. I set it back on the shelf carefully. Nora came in and stood next to me. She was quiet for a long time, looking at the binders, at the graph paper timeline, at the photographs of people's ruined apartments. Why didn't he go to the police? She said finally. He was building a case, I said. He wanted it airtight. He should have told us. Yeah, I said. He should have. She didn't cry. She picked up the blue binder and started reading. We spent 2 hours in that room. I photographed everything on my phone. Nora made a handwritten list of the key documents. Vic stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching the front door. By the time we came down, the light outside had gone pale and flacked. What do you need from me? Vic asked. New locks, I said. Tonight if you can. And don't let anyone in without my direct permission. Not Raymond. Not anyone claiming to act for him. He nodded. I already had the hardware in my truck. We drove home in the kind of quiet that has weight to it. At a red light, Nora said, she called me, the day after the funeral. Said she wanted to take me to lunch. Just the two of us. I kept my eyes on the road. Raymond's wife. Yeah. She said she was worried about you, said you were overwhelmed, and she and Uncle Raymond just wanted to help manage things. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. She paused. I haven't texted her back. Don't. She didn't argue. She looked out the window at the gray Ohio afternoon. That night I called my oldest friend, a woman I've known since 3rd grade who became a paralegal and who has always been the steadiest person I know. Her name is Gwen. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of her best qualities. When I finished, she said, you need a real estate attorney and a criminal attorney, and you need them tomorrow. I know. And you need to document every time Raymond contacts you or Nora. Every call, every text, every email. Date, time, what was said. I know. Colin was trying to protect you, she said. He just ran out of time. I didn't answer that. There wasn't anything to answer. Raymond called the next morning at 8:15. I let it go to voicemail and listened to it while I drank my coffee standing at the kitchen counter. Lynn, it's Raymond. I know this is a hard time. I just wanted to reach out and let you know I'm here for whatever you need. Colin and I had some conversations about his properties that I think would be helpful for you to know about. Can we get together this week? I can come to you. His voice was warm, steady. He had always had that quality, the ability to sound completely reasonable. I called Gwen's attorney recommendation instead. Her name was Miss Caldwell, a real estate and probate lawyer who had an office in downtown Columbus and a reputation, according to Gwen, for not flinching. I got an appointment for the following day. That evening, Nora came into the kitchen while I was making dinner and set her phone on the counter between us. He texted me, she said. The message read, Nora, honey, your dad would have wanted the family to stay close through this. I have some things I'd like to share with you about his wishes for the property. Can we talk privately? I kept stirring the pasta. What do you want to do? I want to tell him to go to hell, she said. But I want to do it in a way that doesn't tip him off that we know anything. I looked at her. She was leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, jaw set, looking more like her father than I'd ever noticed before. Don't respond yet, I said. Let me talk to the attorney first. She picked the phone back up. He says Dad wanted him involved. He says Dad told him things he didn't tell anyone else. He's using the same line he used on me. I know. She set the phone face down. That's how I know he's lying. Dad didn't work that way. Miss Mies. Caldwell's office was on the 14th floor, with a view of the Columbus skyline and the kind of quiet that comes from good windows and thick carpet. She was in her early 50s, direct, and she read through the copies of Colin's documents while I talked without looking up or interrupting. When I finished, she set the papers down. First thing, she said, we filed to confirm your sole ownership of the Caldwell Street property on record. That puts the court on notice before he files anything. Second, this loan documentation and the Crestwood connection is potentially significant. That's not just a civil matter. He's been collecting rent from tenants in properties that are falling apart, I said. For years. Those people deserve to know who's actually behind this. She nodded. The city of Dayton has an open inquiry into Crestwood Holdings. I know the attorney in their housing unit. If your documentation connects Crestwood to your brother-in-law in a traceable way, it does, I said. Colin was thorough. Then we should get them copies. She paused. He's going to push back hard when this starts to move. He may try to go around you to your daughter. He already is. Then we need to move fast. She reached for her notepad. Can you get me complete copies of everything in that storage room by end of week? Nora was already pulling the flash drive from her bag. The week that followed had the quality of trench work, not dramatic, just relentless. Nora and I drove back to the Caldwell Street building 3 days in a row. We scanned every document into an encrypted folder Ms. Caldwell had set up for us. Bissick installed new locks on the front door in the storage room and changed the building security code. He also told me he'd noticed a silver sedan parked across the street on 2 separate evenings, engine running. You think it was Raymond? I asked. I think it wasn't a coincidence, he said. I called Miss Caldwell's office and added it to our running log. Raymond escalated the following Thursday. He showed up at Nora's apartment near campus. She texted me immediately. He's here. At my door. I didn't let him in. He says he has papers he wants me to look at. I called her back in under a minute. Don't open the door. I didn't. He's still out there. Tell him your attorney has advised you not to discuss the estate with anyone without counsel present. A pause. I could hear muffled voices through the phone. Then Nora's voice again, clearer. She says to leave. I heard Raymond's voice, still smooth. Nora, I'm not the enemy here. Your mother is keeping things from you the same way your father did. You deserve to know what you actually inherited. Nora, I said. Don't engage. You don't have to explain anything. I know, she said. Then louder, you need to go. I'm calling my mom's attorney right now. He left. I was in the car and on the highway before she'd finished the sentence. When I got to her apartment, she was sitting on her couch with her laptop open, and she had already emailed Miss Caldwell a timestamp and a summary of what happened. I sat down next to her. He thinks I'm still 12, she said. That's his mistake. She closed the laptop. What do we actually have on him? Like, what's the worst of it? I told her about the loan documents, about the wire transfer from our joint account 8 years ago that I had not known about until Colin's recorder told me. $60,000 that had quietly disappeared and that I had assumed because Colin managed our finances and I trusted him was something I just hadn't tracked. Nora stared at the wall. He took money from you and Dad to start a company that scams poor people out of rent. And then he spent years pretending to be part of the family. Yes. And Dad kept this instead of going to the police because he wanted to protect us first, I said. He was gathering everything he needed to make it impossible for Raymond to walk away. If he'd gone to the police too early with incomplete evidence, Raymond would have buried it. She was quiet for a moment. He was right to do it that way. It just cost him too much time. I didn't say anything. I just sat with that. Miss Caldwell moved faster than I expected. By the end of the second week, she had filed to confirm my ownership of the Caldwell property and submitted Colin's documentation to the Dayton Housing Attorney's office. The city's open inquiry into Crestwood Holdings, which had been stalled for 3 years at the shell company layer, suddenly had a clear path forward. Raymond must have found out within 24 hours, because his tone changed completely. He stopped calling me and started emailing, formal and restrained, with phrases like per our previous discussion for discussions we'd never actually had. He claimed Colin had verbally promised him a stake in the Caldwell property as repayment for investment advice. He claimed I was acting in bad faith. Miss Caldwell filed our response within the day. 2 sentences. No such agreement exists in writing, and we have documentation that the reverse is true. Then came the news article. It was on a local Dayton neighborhood blog that I'd never heard of, the kind of website that looked like a 2009 WordPress template. The headline was, Out-of-town widow sits on blighted Caldwell Street property while Dayton residents wait for promised renovations. The article quoted unnamed community sources saying Colin had promised the building as a community workshop space. It said I was blocking development. It did not name Raymond, but it quoted a real estate consultant named Craig Hollis, who described himself as a longtime advocate for South Side revitalization. Craig Hollis, according to a 2-minute search, was the registered agent for 2 of Raymond's other LLCs. Nora found the article before I did. He's trying to make you look like the villain, she said. I know. Are you going to respond? Ms. Caldwell is. The attorney's statement went out that afternoon. 1 paragraph. Factual, cold, and clear. The property is under lawful sole ownership. No development agreements have been made. Anyone claiming otherwise should be prepared to show documentation. She also called the housing attorney in Dayton to flag the article as possible witness intimidation. He told her he was already aware of Raymond's interest in the case and was treating it accordingly. Gwen drove down from Cleveland that weekend. She showed up with 2 bags of groceries and a bottle of wine and made dinner while Nora and I spread everything out on the kitchen table. Evidence binders, printed emails, the timeline Colin had drawn on graph paper that I'd framed behind glass because I couldn't stand the idea of losing it. Gwen stood at the table with a glass of wine and looked at the whole layout. "Colin built this," she said. "Yes. He really was the least interesting person in the room." She said it gently, the way you say something that is both true and complicated. I laughed, which surprised me. It was the first real laugh in weeks. After dinner, Nora showed us the social media post she drafted. Quiet and direct. The Caldwell Street property belonged to my father. It now belongs to my mother. We are committed to honoring his intentions for it, which were never to sell or transferred under pressure. Misinformation being circulated about this property is being addressed through legal channels. I told her to post it. The response from actual people in the neighborhood was largely supportive. Several people who had lived in Raymond's rental buildings commented. One woman wrote, "I lived in a Crestwood building for 4 years. The heat didn't work half the time. I'm glad someone finally has the paperwork." The mediation was held on a gray Wednesday at a conference center in Columbus. Nora wore her father's old Ohio State sweatshirt with a blazer over it, which I suspect was intentional. I wore the suit I had bought for a conference 3 years ago and never wore again. Raymond was already there when we arrived. He stood when we came in a charcoal suit, hands clasped with his attorney beside him. His wife was not there. He looked at Nora first, then at me. His expression was the one I had known for 11 years. Controlled. Pleasant, with something working behind it. I pulled out a chair and put my folder on the table. Ms. Caldwell sat beside me. Nora took the seat to my right. The mediator was a retired judge named Mr. Mull Patterson with a slow, deliberate manner and reading glasses on a chain around his neck. He reviewed both parties' submissions without comment, then set them down. "We're here to determine whether any negotiated resolution is possible," he said. "Mr. Hargrove, you may begin." Raymond's attorney spoke first. He argued that Colin had made verbal promises, that Raymond had contributed expertise and time to help develop the property, that the loan was an investment with an expected return, that the family had always understood Raymond would be involved. Raymond himself added, looking directly at Nora, "Your father and I had an understanding. He knew how much I cared about that neighborhood. He wanted this to benefit people, not sit empty." Nora didn't look at him when he finished. She looked at Ms. Caldwell. Ms. Caldwell opened her folder. "The first document is the loan agreement your client signed 8 years ago. It is clearly labeled a personal loan, not an investment, with no stated equity interest in any resulting property. The second is the wire transfer from the Hargrove joint account, showing the money came from the deceased and his wife, not from your client's personal funds. The third is the Crestwood Holdings LLC registration, showing your client as sole managing member, filed 6 weeks after receiving the loan. The fourth is a sampling of tenant complaints from 3 Crestwood properties over 5 years, including documented habitability violations. The fifth is the City of Dayton's ongoing housing inquiry, which now has full access to all documentation gathered by Colin Hargrove over 7 years. She set each page on the table as she named it. There is no verbal agreement that supersedes written documentation. There is no community promise that was Colin Hargrove's to make unilaterally. What exists is a clear record of a personal loan, unpaid for 8 years, used to fund a company that has extracted rent from vulnerable tenants while allowing their homes to deteriorate. If your client would like to discuss the return of $60,000 plus interest, we are prepared to listen. Otherwise, all materials have already been referred to the appropriate authorities." The room was very quiet. Raymond's attorney leaned in and spoke to him in a low voice. Raymond stared at the table. The pleasant expression had gone somewhere. What was left underneath it was smaller. Mr. Patterson looked over his glasses at Raymond. "Given the documentation before us, any claim to the Caldwell Street property appears to have no legal basis. Do you have exculpatory evidence you'd like to present?" Raymond didn't answer right away. His attorney put a hand on his arm and said something quietly. Raymond shook it off. He looked up at me. I built things in that city, he said. I know people there. I know, I said. And now they know about Crestwood. Nora set both hands flat on the table. She had been perfectly still for the entire meeting. Now she spoke for the first time. You came to my apartment. You told me my mom was keeping things from me. You said my dad wanted you involved. She kept her voice level, the way Colin used to when he was most serious. Everything in those binders is what my dad actually wanted. He spent 7 years making sure of it. That's what he wanted. Raymond looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face shifted. Not remorse, exactly. More like a door closing. His attorney slid a document across the table. Ms. Caldwell reviewed it, made 2 small edits, and passed it back. Raymond signed it without looking up. The agreement, all claims to the Caldwell Street property withdrawn with prejudice. The $60,000 loan acknowledged as a personal debt. A repayment scheduled to begin within 30 days. No further contact with Nora regarding the estate. All statements to the press or neighborhood organizations to be corrected. Mr. Patterson stamped the papers. This will be filed with the court today. I'll note for the record that the Housing Authority referral is separate and outside the scope of this mediation. Understood, Miss Caldwell said. Outside it was cold, the kind of cold that settles in your coat and stays. Gwen was waiting in the lobby because I had told her to be there. And when she saw our faces, she hugged me before I could say anything. Ms. Caldwell shook my hand on the steps. Call me when the repayment schedule comes in. And the housing case may take a year, but it's solid. Thank you, I said. Colin did the work, she said. You carried it over the finish line. Nora and I drove back to the building on Caldwell Street that afternoon. Not because there was anything urgent to do, but because it felt right. Vic was there, as he always seemed to be when we needed him, and he had the coffee on before we got to the top step. We sat in the workshop on stools Colin had made, drinking coffee out of mismatched mugs. The pegboards were full of his tools. The workbench still had a layer of sawdust on it that neither of us had wanted to wipe off. What do you want to do with it? Nora asked. I looked around the space. Big windows on the ground floor. High ceilings. A second floor with real square footage. A neighborhood that was half forgotten and half trying. The woman who commented on your post, I said. The one who lived in the Crestwood building for 4 years. She said she was a woodworker. Nora looked at me. Your dad built a workshop, I said. Maybe it should be one. She was quiet for a moment. Then a community workshop. Membership-based. Tool lending. Maybe classes. Something that actually gives something back. She pulled out her phone and started taking notes, the way Colin used to, fast and specific, not losing any of it. Vic looked at the ceiling and then at both of us. I can run the operations side, he said. If that's where this is going. That's where it's going, I said. I filled out Colin's life insurance paperwork that weekend. I filed for the transfer of the building permit into my name. I called the housing attorney in Dayton and gave him my direct number. I answered the 2 emails from community members in the neighborhood asking what the plans were with the same short response, still working on it, but we're not selling and we're not going anywhere. The news blog posted a short correction. 2 sentences. Nothing dramatic. The silver sedan stopped appearing on Caldwell Street. Raymond's first repayment came in on schedule, transferred into the account Ms. Caldwell had set up for it, without any accompanying message. The Crestwood investigation moved forward without us having to do anything further. Colin had already done that work. Nora drove back to Columbus at the end of the month to finish her semester. Before she left, she stood in the workshop one more time, looking at the pegboards and the workbench and the high windows. I'm putting this on my resume, she said. Director of Community Programs. Caldwell Street Workshop. You're not even graduated yet. I'm about to be. She shrugged, completely straight-faced. Someone has to run this thing. She drove away in the rain. I stood in the empty workshop for a while after she left. The space smelled like sawdust and machine oil. Colin's tools hung exactly where he'd left them. Outside, the mural on the brick wall down the block was bright even in the gray light. Someone had painted it carefully and it had held. The key was in my coat pocket. I'd been carrying it every day since Mr. Patterson's office, the hardware store copy with the blue painter's tape. Colin's handwriting, small and exact. I didn't need to look at it anymore. I just needed it there. The building was ours. The evidence was filed. The work was beginning. I locked up and walked to my car in the rain and drove home. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in any abstract way, just the plain practical version of it. Every choice has a weight, and eventually that weight lands somewhere. Colin knew that. He spent 7 years carefully stacking evidence in a room I didn't know existed, because he understood that if he moved too soon, Raymond would find a way to walk away clean. He was patient in a way I didn't fully appreciate until I was standing in that storage room reading his handwriting on 7 years' worth of sticky notes. Raymond made a different set of choices. He borrowed money from family and used it to build something that extracted rent from people who couldn't afford to lose it. He let ceilings peel and heat fail, and then he deposited the checks. And for years he sat at our Thanksgiving table and asked Nora about school and seemed like exactly what he wanted everyone to think he was. That's the part that still catches me sometimes. Not the fraud itself, but the sustained performance of it. How much energy it must have taken to maintain. But the thing about sustained performance is that it requires cooperation from the audience. Raymond needed us not to look too closely. He needed Nora to believe he was the warm uncle who had her best interests at heart. He needed me to be too overwhelmed with grief to go to the building before he could. He had everything timed. And then Nora and I didn't cooperate, and the whole architecture of it started to come apart at the corners. I'm not someone who believes the world automatically corrects itself. I've seen enough to know it doesn't. What I believe is that evidence, gathered carefully and protected well, gives you something to work with. Colin gave us that. He did his part with patience and precision, and then Nora and I had to do ours. Show up, read the documents, call the right people. Hold the line when Raymond came to her door and tried the same smooth voice he'd been using for years. Nora is the one I think about most when I replay all of it. She walked into that mediation room in her dad's sweatshirt with a blazer over it, and she sat down and she didn't flinch once. When Raymond looked at her and tried to make her feel like a child who didn't understand the situation, she looked back at him and told him exactly what her father had actually wanted. Clear and steady. I didn't teach her that in any deliberate way. She just paid attention to the right things for 22 years, and when the moment came, she knew what to do with what she'd learned. I think that's the thing I'd say to anyone watching this who is somewhere in the middle of something hard. The work you do quietly, without an audience, without any guarantee it will matter, is the work that ends up mattering most. Colin built that storage room. He organized those binders. He recorded those messages. He didn't know exactly when or how any of it would be needed. He just did it carefully and trusted that it would be. I locked up the Caldwell Street building the other night after a long day. Nora had been there working on the workshop plans. Vic had fixed the back stairs. The windows had been cleaned for the first time in years, and the light came through them differently. I stood in the empty workshop for a few minutes with the key in my hand. Colin's handwriting on the blue tape still legible. That building held the truth he couldn't say while he was alive. Now it's going to hold something else. Something people can actually use. That's cause and effect too.